Thank you. I call the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm very glad to speak in support of these bills. They deliver a key feature of the Albanese government's commitment to take a very different approach to Australia's environmental condition and biodiversity. We're not going to sit idle while Australia's environment continues on a trajectory of deterioration, especially when we know that risks and threats are increasing in the form of climate change, biosecurity impacts and natural disasters. Creating a nature repair market is just one part of a set of coordinated measures being taken by the Albanese government, being led by the Minister for the Environment and Water, and the member for Lyne who just spoke gave the impression that this is the only thing that we're doing, and that's far from the truth. We need to do lots of things, and this is one of them. And the fact that we're doing anything stands in stark contrast to those opposite. I mean, the member for Lyne and I were members of the Environment and Energy Committee, and some of the things he was just talking about before in terms of controlling feral animals are quite laudable. But what did the previous government do when he was a part of it for 9 or 10 years? Absolutely nothing. The nature repair market is a world first, and it will, in essence, connect those who rightly and sensibly want to invest in nature repair with those who can do the work on the ground. And that's a good thing. We need to repair and restore our environment and our biodiversity, in addition to protecting our environment and biodiversity. The other thing about the member for Lyne's contribution, which was odd, I don't know if he noticed, but while he was in government, the member for Maranoa, as the Minister for Agriculture at that stage, only recently in 2021, introduced the Agriculture Biodiversity Stewardship Package. It was a sort of essentially a pilot form of what we are doing. It was a means by which farmers could get credit for work that they were doing in addition to fixed carbon to improve biodiversity. They described at the time the pilot as a world first, and this nature repair market, which we will actually deliver, is clearly a world first, but it was something that the previous government and the member for Maranoa, as the Minister for Agriculture at the time, was spruiking to anyone and everyone who had listened to it. So I'm not sure whether the member for Lyne was paying attention in those government meetings, but it's something that I expect that those opposite will endorse, because it's a sort of a bigger and better form of something that they were thinking about doing, but like so many things, never got around to do. As the Minister for Environment and Water has explained, this bill puts the machinery or the framework in place to create a nature repair market. It puts in place the register, the rules and the regulator. So landholders who undertake restoration repair will be able to receive a tradable certificate that represents that environmental value. And certificates will be listed and traceable through the public register and will be issued and overseen by the Clean Energy Regulator. It is true that we need to go and create this market with care, and we need to make sure that those who undertake environmental repair, restoration and biodiversity improvement do so in a way that is rigorously overseen, measured and tracked. There is always the potential in any market for things to be done in a way that doesn't have the kind of integrity that we would all expect. That's why the Clean Energy Regulator, as an independent statutory authority, will be given the task of ensuring that kind of integrity and confidence exists in this market. Again, I mean, the member for Lyne talked about the market as being an artificial construct. Every market is an artificial construct. Every market is an artificial construct. The problem with our market, the problem with our economy, is it's taken certain forms of harm and the costs related to that harm, whether it's climate change or impacts to the environment and biodiversity, and just let them fall on the Commonwealth, really. It's a tragedy of the commons, is how it's described, where you basically have all kinds of economic activity that have harmful impacts and costs associated with those harmful impacts, but they're not actually built into the market. So all of the people producing carbon and profiting from the production that involves carbon emissions never actually incorporate the cost of those emissions into their economic process. It's the fact that all markets which we as human beings create don't work very well that causes a lot of these problems, and that are ultimately unsustainable. I mean, the other phrase that I found a bit interesting from the member for Lyne is to describe this as a piecemeal response to a perceived ill. I mean, is anyone suggesting that the savage and profound environmental decline, the world over, but also in Australia, and biodiversity decline in Australia in particular, is a perceived ill? A perceived ill? That's just bizarre. But Deputy Speaker, this new framework is a world first. It will work with a range of other measures to begin the considerable work required to protect, repair and restore Australia's environment on land and at sea. And we cannot wait another day for that work to begin. It is a genuinely desperate imperative. Our environment is not in good shape. Our environment has been hammered. It has been hammered, chiefly because of us, chiefly because we've lived in a way that is unsustainable. The two vectors of harm have been destruction of habitat and the impact of invasive species. And then to that we have added in recent decades climate change, which sadly in lots of areas has now become the greatest threat and is exacerbating the already severe impacts of habitat destruction and invasive species. The previous government knew all about that. They knew all about the picture, the big picture. They knew all about the vectors of harm, and they didn't do anything about it. They knew it because they commissioned the Samuels report, and they knew it because they received, but hid, the most recent State of the Environment report. Deputy Speaker, the Samuels review put all of this pretty cleanly, and it said, this is a review that the previous government commissioned, they received, and you think that they might have read. This is what Graham Samuel said. Australia's natural environment and iconic places are in an overall state of decline and are under increasing threat. They are not sufficiently resilient to withstand current, emerging or future threats, including climate change. The EPBC Act is outdated and requires fundamental reform. It does not enable the Commonwealth to effectively fulfil its environmental management responsibilities to protect nationally important matters. And what did the former government do with that review that they commissioned? Nothing. Zero. Literally nothing. There were a few elements of the report, pretty clear, pretty sensible. Reform the EPBC, make sure that there are strong and effective national standards, put in place an independent environmental protection agency. No, they weren't going to have any of that. In fact, they made clear at the very outset that they would never introduce an independent environmental protection agency, and that is another of the reforms that this government is getting on with, and that there is funding $120 million in the budget for precisely that. The previous government comprehensively ignored the Samuels review when it said to them quite plainly, and I quote again, "To shy away from the fundamental reforms recommended by this review is to accept the continued decline of our iconic places and the extinction of our most threatened plants, animals and ecosystems. This is unacceptable. A firm commitment to change from all stakeholders is needed to enable future generations to enjoy and benefit from Australia's unique environment and heritage." And the review went on to say, "Given the current state of Australia's environment, broad restoration is required to address past loss, build resilience and reverse the current trajectory of environmental decline. Restoration is necessary to enable Australia to accommodate future development in a sustainable way. The scale of the task ahead is significant and is too large for governments to try to solve alone. To support greater collaboration between governments and the private sector, new mechanisms are needed to leverage the scale of investment that will be needed for decades to come." And Deputy Speaker, these bills and the reforms they create are exactly the kind of thing that Samuels was calling for, exactly the prescription that he gave to the former government when he called for new mechanisms to leverage the scale of investment. And that's what this will do, among all the other measures that have been led by the Minister for Environment and Water. As I've said, we know the scale of the crisis we're dealing with. The government received the latest State of the Environment report. It was the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party as the responsible minister at the time. Like so many reports in her portfolio area, that went straight to the bottom of the drawer. The State of the Environment report, with its damning indictment of the deteriorated condition of Australia's terrestrial and marine ecosystems, and its damning indictment of the fragility of our biodiversity, particularly in the form of many endangered species that exist on the brink, that went straight to the bottom drawer. That was not put in the public domain because the previous government wasn't prepared to do anything and didn't want the opprobrium, didn't want to bear the responsibility for their inaction. But we've got the State of the Environment report because, of course, change of government, those things have to come out of the bottom drawer and into the light. and that environment report tells us the circumstances in Australia environmentally in no uncertain terms. We've lost more mammal species than any other continent in the last 2 centuries. We've got one of the highest rates of species decline among countries in the OECD. We've got more than 1,900 Australian species and ecological communities that are threatened or at risk of extinction. Almost half of Australia's major vegetation types have lost at least 20% of their original extent, and one, which is casuarina forests and woodlands, has lost more than 40% of its original extent. The overall assessment of Australia's freshwater ecosystems in southern, eastern and southwestern Australia since the 2016 State of the Environment report, in other words the previous 5-year report, are generally in very poor condition. In the Murray-Darling Basin, Deputy Speaker, which is home to 16 internationally significant Ramsar wetlands, 35 endangered species and 98 species of water birds, rivers and catchments are mostly in poor condition. Native fish populations in the Murray-Darling Basin have declined by more than 90% in the past 150 years. The previous member, the member for Lyne, described this as a perceived ill. A perceived ill. 90% of the native fish populations in the Murray-Darling Basin have gone in the last 150 years, thanks to us, and that's a perceived ill. Of course, we know coral reef ecosystems are in poor condition. We had unprecedented marine heat waves in 2016, 2017 and 2020, first ever consecutive years of coral bleaching. That's the reality, Deputy Speaker, of our environment, and that's the reason for the urgency, the desperate urgency of the task of greater environmental protection, repair and restoration. We cannot turn away from that harm. We cannot ignore that trajectory of decline. That is what we have done, and we've borne the results. We've borne the results. You know, we're seeing species of marine bird and fish where you get 50% of them with microplastic in their gut because we've done nothing about marine plastic pollution. The previous government did nothing about plastic pollution. But that's why this government is acting to do something different, to take a different approach. We're acting on climate change. It's why the Minister for Environment and Water's wasted no time in getting started on work nationally and being proactive and collaborative internationally. We've made a commitment to protect 30% of our land and sea by 2030. We've joined the High Ambition Coalition to end plastic pollution. On the 5th of June this year, World Environment Day, which, Deputy Speaker, is also my birthday, I'm happy to say, the Minister announced that the Macquarie Island Marine Park is set to triple in size. 385,000 additional square kilometres of Australia's oceans under high protection, an area larger than Germany that will be completely protected from fishing, mining and other extractive activities, making not just a significant contribution within our own, the oceans for which we are responsible, but a globally significant contribution to the health and resilience of our oceans. It picks up and continues the work that Labor undertook when last in government to create a national network of marine protected areas. We did that when we were last in government. We're barely 12 months into the job, and we're getting on with that again. We've added a remarkable and very, very significant additional amount of ocean protection. The recent budget includes, as I said, funding to create an EPA, $262 million to support Commonwealth National Parks, $163 million to the brilliant Australian Institute of Marine Science to continue their world-leading scientific marine research, nearly $120 million to community groups and NGOs and local governments and First Nations groups to clean up and restore local urban rivers and waterways. All of those things, along with these bills creating a nature repair market, are part of a massive, massive night and day, black and white change between the awful neglect and willful blindness of the previous government when it came to our environment and the approach that the Albanese Labor government is taking under the leadership of the Minister for Environment and Water. As I've outlined, Deputy Speaker, the Albanese government as a whole and the Minister for Environment and Water have wasted no time because there is no time to waste. Creating a nature repair market is one measure that answers what experts like Graham Samuels have called for, new and innovative ways of delivering repair and restoration, while at the same time we make new, rigorous, urgent and in many cases uncompromising efforts to protect Australia's environment and Australia's remarkable but endangered biodiversity. That's what has to be done. That's what this government is getting on with and doing.
Thank the member for Fremantle. The immediate question is that the amendment